Okay. Part 240 qualification certification of locomotive and more upon subpart B. It's on page 6 of this PDF. All right, subpart B, component elements of the certification process. This certification program required after September 17, 1991. Each railroad in operation on the date of the subject of the part shall have the effect the written program for the certifying qualifications of locomotive engineer. So, a railroad commencing operations from after September 17, 1991 shall have such program in effect prior to commencing operations after the pertinent date of the specified paragraph EFG and EF and G of 2040-201. Each railroad should have a certification program approved for accordance with the 240-103. A procedure of designating any person procedure for designating any person it determines as to be qualified as a supervisor of a locomotive engineer that complies with the critical criteria established in 24-105. A designation of the class services determines will be used in compliance with the criteria established. A procedure evaluating the prior safety conduct of the complies with the criteria established in 24-109. Procedures evaluating the visual hearing acuity that complies with the criteria established 24-10121. Procedures for training that complies with the criteria established 24-123. The procedures knowledge testing that complies with the critical established 24-125. Procedures for skill performance testing and compliance with the criteria established in 24-127. Procedure mounting operational performance complies with the criteria established in 24-129. 240-103. Approval for design of individual railroad programs of the Federal Railroad Administration. Each program should submit a written program description of how its program conforms in the specific requirements of the part accordance with the procedures contained in Appendix B of the following schedule. Class 1 railroads including National Railroad Passenger Corporations. The railroad providing commuter services shall submit no later than November 15, 1991. So your national railroad passengers and railroads providing commuter services shall submit no later than November 15th, 1991. A Class 2 railroad shall submit no later than May 1st, 1992. A Class 3 railroad, including a switching terminal railroad, any of the other railroad otherwise classified, shall submit no later than November 1992. A railroad commencing operations after the pertinent data previously specified in the paragraph shall submit the certification program for approval at least 60 days before the commencing of the operations. The submission shall submit the railroad election either to accept responsibility training of the student engineers and thereby obtaining authority for the railroad to initiate the certifying a person as an engineer appropriate class of the service to recertify only engineers previously certified by other railroads. A railroad that elects to recertify only engineers previously certified by other railroads. A railroad elects to accept the responsibility for the training of the student and engineers. It shall state the submission whether it will be conducting training program and employing a training program connecting some other entity in the behalf of the adopted ratified by the railroad. A railroad program is considered approved and may be implemented 30 days after the required filing data for the actual filing date unless the administrative notifies the railroad of the written of the program does not conform to the criteria set forth in this part 1. If the administrator determines the program does not conform, the administrator will inform the railroad of the specific deficiencies. The railroad informs the railroad of deficiencies more than 30 days initial filing date. The original program remaining in effect until 30 days after the approval of the revised program is revived. The railroad shall submit its program within 30 days after the date such notice deficiencies or failure to resubmit the program with the necessary revisions considered the failure to implement a program under this part. The administrator will inform the railroad of the writing whether its revised program conforms to this part. If the program does not conform, the railroad resubmit the program. A railroad intends the material to modify the program after receiving initial Federal Railroad Administration approval shall submit a description of how it intends to modify the program conform with the specific requirements of this part at least 30 days prior to the implementation of such a program. A modification as material as would affect the program's conform and within its this part. Modification is material if it would affect the program's conformation with the part. Modification submission containing the description and the conforms with the pertinent portion of the procedure containing in Appendix B. The modification submission will be handled in accordance with the procedures in paragraph C and D of this section, as though of this section as though it were a new program. Criteria and selection of the designated supervisors of locomotive engineers. Each railroad program shall be includes criteria procedures for implementation of this section. Railroad shall examine the person considered for the qualification supervisor of locomotive engineering, determine that he or she knows the understanding of the requirements of the parts, can approximately test evaluation of the knowledge skills of locomotive engineers, has necessary supervising experiences, prescribed appropriate remedial action that are noted deficiencies in training, knowledge, or skills of the person seeking for the obtaining and the retaining of the certification is a certified engineer. So he has the necessary supervisor experience to prescribe the appropriate remedial actions and for noted deficiencies in the training, knowledge, and skills of the person seeking to be obtained retaining a certification is a certified engineer. Codified 240-107. Title 49, 240-107. Criteria for designation of class of service. Each railroad program shall be stated of the three classes of services provided. Each railroad program shall state which of the three classes of services provided in the paragraph B of this section that it will cover. A railroad may issue a certificate for any or all of the following classes of the services: train service engineers, locomotive service engineers, student engineers. The following operational constraints apply to each of the services. Training service engineers may operate locomotives singly in multiples and move them with or without cars coupled to them. Locomotive servicing engineers may operate locomotives singly in multiples, but may not move them with the cars coupled to them. Student engineers may operate only under the direct, immediate supervision of an instructor engineer. Each railroad authorized to impose additional conditions of the operational restriction of the service engineer and may be performed for these identified sections, provided these conditions or restrictions are not inconsistent with this part. 240-109. General criteria for eligible based on prior safety conduct. Each railroad program shall include a criteria procedure implementation section. The railroad shall evaluate the prior safety conduct of any person considering the qualification of the locomotive engineer. The program shall require that the person ineligible if the person has adverse record for the prior safety conduct is provided in 240-115, 240-117, 240-119. The program shall require evaluation data that shall reflect the person's prior safety conduct of the railroad employee as a person prior to the safety conduct as an operator of a motor vehicle, provided that there is a relevant prior conduct. The information to be evaluated should include the relevant data furnished of the evaluating railroad owned records of the person previously employed of the railroad. The relevant furnish of the evaluating railroad's owns record. If the person was previously an employee of the railroad, the relevant furnished by the other railroad formerly employing the person. The relevant data furnished by the governmental agency pertaining to the motor vehicle driving records. The railroad process for the evaluation information concerning the prior safety conduct shall be designed to conform, whether necessary, with the procedural requirements of 240-11, 240-113, 240-115, 240-117, 240-119, 240-217. When evaluating a person's motor vehicles driving record, a person's railroad employment record of railroad should not consider the information concerning the motor vehicle driving incidents or prior railroad safety conduct that occurred prior to the effective date of the rule occurred in the time that other than specifically provided in the 240-115, 240-117, 240-119 subpart. A railroad's program should provide a candidate certification, recertification as responsible opportunity to review, comment, the writing any of the record containing the information concerning the prior safety of the conduct, including information pertaining to determinations required under the 240-119 subpart of the railroad believes the record contains the information that can be sufficient to render the person ineligible for the certification under the subpart. The opportunity for the comment shall be afforded for the person prior to the railroad rendering the eligibility decision based on the information. A responsive comment furnished shall be retained by the railroad in accordance with the Title 240-215 of this part, Title 49. It's the program of the Code of Federal Regulations. The program shall be included the method of the person to advise the railroad that he or she has never been a railroad employee obtain a license to drive a motor vehicle. Nothing in this section shall be constructed imposing a duty of equipment that a person has have prior railroad employment experience or obtaining a motor vehicle or obtaining a motor vehicle driver's license in order to become a qualified certified locomotive engineer. Nothing in this section 240.11, 240.111, 240.113 shall be constructed the provisions should be constructed to prevent person subject to the part of entering the agreement that results in the railroad obtaining the information needed for the compliance of the subpart different manner than described in 240.11, 240.113. Alright, 240.11 individual duties for furnishing data of the prior safety conduct as a motor vehicle operator, except for the initial certification under the paragraph B, H, and I, the 240.201 of this person covered by the 240.109. Each of this persons therefore seeking certification and recertification under this part of within 180 days preceding the date of the railroad decision on the certification, recertification, taking actions required in the paragraph A, B, and H of the paragraph G of this section, and to make the information concerning his or her driving record available for the railroad of the considering self-certification, recertification, and taking any additional actions in concluding providing any necessary consent required by the state and federal law to make information concerning his or her driving record available to the railroad. Each person seeking certification, recertification under this part shall be requested in writing that the chief of each of the driver licensing agencies identified with the paragraph C of this section provide a copy of the agency's available information concerning his or her driver record of the railroad that consider certification or recertification request in accordance with the provision of the paragraph D and E of the section of the check of the National Driver Register performed to the identifying additional information concerning his or her driving record and any resulting information provided to the railroad. Each person shall request any information required under the paragraph B1 of this section of the chief of the driver licensing agencies, which is last issued a person of the driver's license, chief driver's license agency, any of the other states that issued the reissued or here are the driver's license within the preceding 5 years. How each person shall have the request information required for the paragraph on the section of the chief National Driver's Registry, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration 400 to 7th Street, South Washington, D.C. 20590, in accordance with the procedures contained in the Appendix C, unless the person's motor vehicle driving license was issued by one of the driver license agencies identified in Appendix D. If advised of the railroad of the driver's license agency, National Highway Safety Administration is informed of the railroad of the additional information concerning the person's driving history may exist in the files of the state agency not previously contacted in accordance with the section. Such a person shall request in writing the chief of the state agencies complied with the information, providing a copy of availability information prospective certifying the railroad to any additional action required of the state and the federal to obtain the additional information. Any person who has never obtained a motor vehicle driving license is not required to comply with the provision of paragraph B of the section should notify the railroad of the head of the facts in accordance with the procedure of the railroad of the comply with the 240.109. In the actions required for the compliance with the paragraph A of the section shall be undertaken within 180 days preceding the date of the railroad decision concerning the certification and recertification. 240 and 113. Individual's duties furnishing the data of the prior safety conduct as an employee of a different railroad, except for the initial certifications under paragraph B and H and I of the 240.201 and the person and covered in 240.109H. Each person seeking certification, recertification under this part shall, with 180 days preceding the date of the railroad decision on the certification, recertification, taking these actions required for the paragraph of the section to make information concerning his or her prior railroad service available to the railroad for considering certification, recertification, taking any additional actions, including providing any necessary consent required for the state and federal law, the information concerning his or her railroad available to that railroad. Each person seeking the certification, recertification under this part shall request in writing the chief operating officer under the appropriate person of the former employee railroad to provide the copy with the railroad availability information concerning his or her record of the railroad that is considered with such for certification, recertification. 240-115 consideration of a prior safety conduct as a motor vehicle operator. Each railroad program shall include the criteria, procedure, and implementation of the section evaluating a person, motor, the driving record of railroad should not consider information concerning motor driving incidents that occurred more than 36 months before the month in which the railroad making the certification decision shall only consider information concerning with the following types of the motor vehicle incidents: a conviction of the completed state application, conviction or for a completed state action to cancel, revoke, suspension, deny a motor vehicle's driver's license, operating motor vehicle while under the influence or impaired alcohol or controlled substance, and conviction uncompleted with the state action, cancels, revokes, suspends, deny any motor vehicle driver's license for refusal undergoing the testing as required by the state law enforcement, and others officials seeking determination while a person is operating a vehicle under the influence of alcohol, controlled in the substance. If such incidents identify the railroad, it shall provide the data with the railroad EAP's counselor together with the information on the concerning of the person. The railroad service record shall refer to the person. The evaluation determine that if the person is active substance abuse disorder, the person should operate the evaluation should provide any of the requested records of the prior consultation treatment, the review excessively the EAP counselor in the consent of such evaluation. If a person is evaluated is not currently affected by an active substance abuse disorder, the subject data should not be considered further respect to certification. However, the railroad shall on recommendation of an EAP counselor, condition of certification upon participation in any need of aftercare follow-up with the testing of alcohol or drugs deemed necessary for the EAP consistent with the technical standards specified in 240-119 of this part. If the person evaluated for the currently affected for the active substance abuse disorder, the person shall not be currently certified, and the provisions of 240-119 will apply. 240-117 criteria consideration operating rules and data. Each railroad program shall include the criteria procedures for implementation of the section process or demonstrated failure to comply with the described in the paragraph in this section of the railroad. The rules participate in the safety operation shall not be concurrently certified in locomotive engineer. A certified engineer who demonstrates a failure to comply with the described paragraph E of the section of the railroad rules participate in the safety operation trained shall have the certification revoked. Limitations on considered operating rule compliance except for the provided in the paragraph of this paragraph I of this section determination whether a person may be remain certified as long as the locomotive engineer locomotive engineer railroad shall consider operating rule compliance data only to conduct described paragraph E in the section of the curb with a period of 60 consecutive months prior to determination. Review for existing certification shall identify the properly upon the occurrence of the documentation of any of the conduct described in paragraph any railroad consideration violation operating rule or participate that involved failure to control locomotive training in accordance with the signal indication that requires a complete stop before passing it, failure to adhere to the limitations concerning the train speed when the speed at which the train operated exceeds the maximum authorized limit at least 10 miles per hour by. These are criteria consideration operating compliance data. 10 miles per hour or by more than one half of the authorized speed, which is less. Failure to adhere to the procedure of the safe for the use of the train engine and brakes of the procedure and or required compliance with the transmission and transfer initial and intermediate terminal testing and provisions Title 49 Code Federal Regulations Part 232 and C Title 49 Code Federal Regulations 232.12 and 13. Occupying main track without a proper authority, failure to comply with the prohibition against tampering with locomotive mounted safety devices, and incidents with non-compliance with 219.101 of the chapter law. However, this incident considers a violation only the purpose of the paragraph G2 and G3 of this section. If this if any of the single incidents personal conduct contravened more than one of the operating rules of the practices, that every shall be treated in a single violation of the purpose of this section. Incidents in compliance with this chapter, however, such incidents consider the violation only for the purpose of the paragraph G2 and G3. G. A period of ineligibility described in the paragraph shall begin for the person not currently uncertified at the date of the railroad written determination that most recently incident has occurred. Beginning of the person currently certified on the date of the railroad notification of the person recertification has been denied or certification has been revoked. And number 3, and be determined in accordance with the following following standards. One, in the case of the single incident involving violation of one or more of the operating rules of the participating described in paragraph E1 and through E5 of this section, a person shall eligible to hold the certificate for a period of 1 month. And if in case of two separate incidents involving the violations of one or more of the operating rules of the prescribed in paragraph E, and if this section occurred within 36 months of each other, the person shall be ineligible to hold the certificate for a period of 1 year. In case of more than two such violations consecutive to the 60-month intervals, a person shall be ineligible to hold the certificate for a period of 5 years. Number 4, were based on an occurrence of the violation described in subparagraph E6 of this section, different periods of the ineligibility may result under the provision of the section 240-119 of the longer period ineligible shall control future eligibility to hold certificates. Only person with the certification has been denied revoked of the person 1 year in accordance with the provisions of the paragraph G2 of the section of the reason for the non-compliance of 219-101 of the chapter shall be eligible for the grant reinstallment certification prior to the exemption and of the initial period of the eligibility. Such a person shall be eligible for a grant reinstatement until the person has been evaluated, designated supervisor, locomotive engineer, determined to have received adequate remedial training. The person shall have successfully completed a mandatory program training of the retraining if determined to be necessary. If the railroad prior to the return service at least one half of the pertinent period of the ineligibility specified in the paragraph G2 of the section elapsed, and if no event of the incident to meet the criteria of paragraph I through 1 through 4. If the section considered as prior incidents for the purposes of paragraph G3 of this section, even if such incidents have been validly determined by the violation as the time has occurred, incidents that shall not be considered under the paragraph G3 of the section of those that occurred prior to the effective date of the amendment involved violations one or more of the following operation rules of the practices: failure to conduct a locomotive training in accordance with the signal indications, failure to adhere to the limitations concerning the train speed, failure to adhere to the procedures of the safe using of the train, engineering of the brakes, entering track segment with proper authority where could have been found to be violations under the section prior to May 10th, 1993, and would not be violation of the paragraph of this section amended. Criteria for consideration data of substance abuse disorder and alcohol, drug rules and compliance. Each railroad program shall include a criteria procedure implementation of this section. Fitness requirement: a person who has an active substance abuse disorder shall not currently be certified as a locomotive except for the provided in the paragraph in each section. Certified engineer determined to have an active substance abuse disorder shall be suspended for certification consistent with the other provisions of this part. Certification is reinstated as provided in the paragraph D of this section. If in the case of a current employee, the railroad evaluated as having an active substance abuse disorder, and including the person identified under the procedures of 240-115, the employee may otherwise eligible to be volunteer self-refer to substance abuse counseling and treatment under the policy required in 219-403 of the chapter. The railroad should be then treat the substance abuse evaluation confidentially with respect to current and eligible certification, prior alcohol, drug, and conduct, federal rule compliance, one, and determination whether the person may remain certified as a locomotive, and the rule shall be conducted as described in paragraph C2 of the section in the current of the period of 60 consecutive months to the review of the review. Certification shall be initiated promptly on occurrence of documentation of incidents conducted by the described in paragraph. A railroad shall consider a violation of 219-101 and 219-102 if the chapter the refusal or failure to provide a breath or body fluid sample of testing under the requirements of the paragraph 219 of the chapter, whether instructed to do so, the railroad by railroad representative. Paragraph eligible described in the paragraph shall be 1. Begin for the person not currently certified at the date of the railroad written documentation of the most recent incident and has occurred, beginning with the person currently certified and the date of this railroad notification. Person recertification has denied, certification has revoked. The period of error, the ineligibility described in the paragraph shall be determined in accordance with the following standards. In case of the signal violation of 219-102, the chapter of the person shall be eligible to hold hold certified during the elevation any required or treatment as described in paragraph D of this section. In case of the two violations of 219-102, the person shall be ineligible to hold a certificate a period for 2 years. In case of the more than two such violations, then the person shall ineligible to hold a certificate period of 5 years. In case of the one of the violation of 219-102, the chapter of the one violation of the 219-101, the chapter of the person ineligible to hold certification for the period of 3 years. In the case of the one violation of 219-101, then the chapter of the person shall ineligible to hold a certificate for the period of 3 years. And 3, in case of the violation of 219-101, this chapter shall be ineligible to hold a certificate for a period of 9 unless unidentified in a violation through a qualifications co-worker report as described in 219-10405. This chapter. An engineer waives the investigation, in which case the certification shall be any the certification shall be deemed suspended during the evaluation. Any required prior treatment is described in paragraph D. In the case of the two or more violations of 219-101, the person shall be ineligible to hold the certificate for a period of 5 years. In case of the refusal of the failure to provide a breathing and body fluid sample by the testing under the requirements of the paragraph 219 of the chapter, when instructed to do so, the railroad representative refusal or failure to be treated for the purpose of ineligibility under the paragraph same manner as violation 219-102, the refusal failure to provide a urine specimen of the testing, or 219-101 in the case of the refusal of the failure to provide a breath sample, the subpart D and the blood specimen of the mandatory post-accident toxicology testing. Subpart C, the future eligibility to hold a certificate following the alcohol drug violation. The following requirements apply to the person who has been denied certification, has had certification suspended, revoked as a result of conduct described in paragraph C of the section. 1. The person shall not be eligible to reinstate the certificate unless other until the person has 1. Being evaluated by the EAP counselor and determined by the person currently active to substance abuse disorder. Successfully completed a program counseling treatment determined by the necessary EAP counselor prior to the return of the service. Presented by the urine sample and testing of the subpart H. The part of testing negative controlled substances is said by the test negative alcohol under the paragraph D4 of this section. Any engineer placed in the service returned to the service under the above stated conditions shall be continued. Any program counseling of the treatment deemed necessary by the EAP counselor shall and subject to a reasoned program to follow up the alcohol drug testing with a prior testing, without prior notice for the period of not more than 60 months following the return of the service. Following up the test shall include no fewer than 6 alcohol tests, 6 drug tests during the first 12 months following the return of the service. Return of the service following up the alcohol drug test shall be performed consistent with the requirements of subpart H and part 219 of this chapter. The paragraph does not create an entitlement to utilize the services railroad EAP counselors to afford ability to leave the employment, the counseling of the treatment, and employment as locomotive engineer, nor does it restrict discretion availability of the railroad to take discretion action based on conduct described here and confidentially protected. Nothing in this part shall be affected the responsibility of the railroad under the 219-403. This chapter voluntary referral policy of the treatment voluntary referrals for the substance abuse counseling and treatment of the confidentially certification status of an engineer is successfully assisted with the under the procedures of the section should be adversely affected. However, the railroad should include the voluntary referral policy required for the issued pursuant to the 219-403 after the provision of at least with respect of the certified locomotive engineer. A candidate for certification policy confidentially is waived for the extent of the railroad shall receive from the EAP counselor official notice of the substance abuse disorder shall suspend or revoke the certification as an appropriate if the person is any time that refuses to cooperate with the recommended the course of the counseling and treatment. 240-121 criteria of the vision and hearing and acuity data. Each railroad program shall include the criteria, procedure, and implementation of the section fitness requirement. A person who does not have the visual acuity and hearing acuity that meets exceed the level to proceed with the section shall not exceed the period of the paragraph of the section currently being certified as a locomotive engineer. Except for the provided in the paragraph, each person shall have a visual acuity as performed exceeding the following thresholds. For a distant viewing, either distant visual acuity of at least 240 in Senlin in each eye within the corrective lenses. Distant visual acuity separated and directed at least 2040 Snellen 2040, the corrective lens is distant binocular activity of 2040, and both eyes are without corrective lenses. A field vision of at least 70 degrees of horizontal meridian in each eye. This ability to recognize and distinguish between the colors and signs, except for the provided the paragraph on this section, each person shall have the hearing acuity and speech and exceeded the following thresholds when tested to be the audiodermic devices calibrated by the American National Standard Specification of audio meters. This person does not have the average hearing losses in a better ear greater than 40 decibels at 500 hertz or 1000 hertz or 2000 hertz with or without using hearing aid. A person may need a threshold paragraph at the C and D of this section for the paragraph for medical evaluation. Railroad medical examiner determining the period of ability safety operating locomotive medical examiner concludes the dispute not meeting the threshold of the person ability to safely operate the locomotive. The person qualified for the locomotive engineer. Such certification conditions any specific medical or examiners are determined in writing if necessary. Critical initial and continuing education. Each railroad program shall include the criteria procedure for the implementation of this section. A railroad should provide the continuing education certified locomotive engineers to ensure that each of the engineer maintains the necessary knowledge and skill ability concerning the personal safety operating rules, practically mechanically conditioning equipment, methods of safety training. All right. Once again, a railroad should provide the continuing educational certified locomotive engineers to ensure that each engineer maintains the necessary knowledge, skill, ability, and concerning personnel safety operating rules, practices, mechanical condition of the equipment, methods of safe training, methods of safe train handling, including familiarity and physical characteristics relevant to the federal safety rules. A railroad elects to train the previously untrained to be locomotive engineers shall be a railroad that elects to train previously untrained persons to be locomotive engineers shall provide initial training for in the minimum. And with a minimum. And composed class hours performance familiar is composed of class hours skill performance familiarization physical characteristics components including both knowledge and peer performance skills testing. A conductor under the supervision of the qualified class instructor is subdivided into the segments of the periods the appropriate duration and effects to effectively cover the following subjects in these areas: personal safety, railroad operating rules, mechanical condition of the equipment, training, handling procedures, including the locomotive train and brakes, familiarization, physical characteristics, including training, handling, compliance with federal regulations, conducted with the performance of skill components shall and be under the supervision of qualified instructor and engineer located in the same compartment, whether in possible place a student engineer in the control of the locomotive for a significant portion of the time, permit a student to experience whether the students to experience whether the variety of the trains are normally operated by the railroad. Okay, 240.125 criteria for testing knowledge. Each railroad and person program shall include a criteria procedure implementation of this section. Railroad should have the procedure testing person evaluated with the qualification of locomotive engineer in either a train and locomotive service to determine whether the person has sufficient knowledge of the railroad rules, practices, safe operation trains. The testing should be selected by the railroad. Testing method shall be shall be designed to examine the person's knowledge, railroad rules, practice, safety operations, training, objective in nature, administrative in writing, and conform with the following subject: personal safety practices, operating procedures. Operating practices, equipment inspection practices, training, handling procedures, including familiarity with the physical characteristics of the territory, compliance with the federal safety and rules. Sufficient accurate measurements of person knowledge and covered the subject conducted without open reference books and other materials except for the degree of the person is being tested on his or her ability to use such a reference book and material. The conduct of the test shall be documented in writing. The documentation shall be containing the sufficient information identifying the relevant facts relied to the evaluation purposes. Criteria for examining skills. Each railroad shall be including the criteria procedure for the implementation of the section. Railroad should have the procedures examining performance skills of the person evaluated the qualification of locomotive engineer in either train locomotive services to determine whether the person's skills of safety operation locomotives including the proper application of railroad rules and practices for the safe operation of locomotive trains in most demanding classes of the type of services the person will be permitted to perform. The testing procedure selected by the railroad shall be designed to examine the person in safety operation of locomotive locomotives, including the proper application of the railroad rules, practices, safety operations, locomotive trains, and performing most of the demanding class of the type of the services other than person will be permitted to perform. Conducting a designated supervisor locomotive engineers for the covers of the following subjects during the testing period: operating practices, equipment, instrumentation practices, training, handling practices, compliance with federal safety rules, but be sufficient along length and effective to evaluate the person's ability to operate the trains conducted with um, be the sufficient length of effective evaluate the person's ability to operate the trains conducted with the person. Either one is control of the type of the train normally operated with the railroad of the segment of railroad which is the person may be permitted to require of the railroad to operate in the normal course of events after certification. 2. If in the controls of Type 1 and Type 2 simulator program replicate the representative behavior of the type of the train normally operated the railroad segment of the railroad in which the person might be permitted to require of the railroad to operate in the normal course of the events of the after certification. Conduct of the test should be documented in writing is designated by the supervisor. Documentation shall contain the relevant facts concerning the train being operated, the constraints being applicable to the operation, the factors observed but relied on evaluation purposes of designated supervisor. Okay, whatever part C is. Okay, I'm going to go to part C, and then we're going to read appendix B. 240-129 criteria of monitoring operational performance certified engineers. Each railroad program is included the criteria of the procedure implementation section. A railroad shall have the procedure monitoring operational performance as those determined as qualified locomotive engineer in either train or locomotive service. The procedure shall be designated to determine that the procedure possesses routinely employs the skills to operate locomotives on the trains, including the proper application of the railroad rules and practices, safety operation of locomotives and trains to be designed so that each train and each mail shall annually monitored and designated supervisor the locomotive engineer be designed, and so that the locomotive engineer is either accompanied by a designated supervisor for a reasonable length of time of his or her training, handling the activities, electronically record of the train operating events and record. The procedure may be designed so that the locomotive engineer may be determined by either one of the controls of the type of the train normally operated of that railroad segment of the railroad, which persons might be permitted and required for the railroad to operate in normal course of then certification. 2 is the controls of the Type 1 and Type 2 simulator program require to responsible private behavior to type of the train normally operated the railroad segment of the railroad, which the person might be permitted to require for the railroad to operate in the normal course of events and so after certification. The testing examination procedure selected by the railroad for the conducting and monitoring program for the may be designed so that the locomotive engineer shall be given at least one unannounced test to each calendar year. Designed for the test of engineer compliance with the provision of the railroad operating rules of the required response to the signal to display less than clear aspects. The railroad operates a signal system that complies with the part 236 of this chapter. Designed for the testing engineer compliance with the provisions of railroad operating timetable other than mandatory directives of the required for the affirmative response of the locomotive engineer as less favorable conditions otherwise expected prior initial application. Prior initial initiation of the test. Designation designed for the testing engineer compliance with the provision of the railroad operating timetables other than mandatory directions violations within the engineers were cited by the railroad and causing the train accidents, reporting the compliance with Part 225 of this chapter preceding the calendar, designed for the administrative of these tests effectively distributed through the whatever portion of the 24-hour day of the railroad conducts of the operation, and designed so the individual test is administered without prior notice to the engineer being tested. Part C, implementation certification process.